Hello everyone and welcome to another ModellingSeb video where today I think it's time to give Ivan a nice paint job to match his T-34. Now, last episode I focused on the chipping and rust effects on the T-34, which was a little over 3 months ago now. I know, I have a fantastic upload schedule, you don't have to tell me twice. But after working on the T-34 so much, I think it's time to change it up a bit and paint the figure instead. Now, this is a disclaimer, and you probably already saw this in the title, but this is my first figure, so it might not be that good, or, well, it's my first figure in over 3 years, but that was a complete failure of an attempt. So now, after 3 years, it's time to give it another go. The figure itself is from a company called Tank, and it comes in a set of 3 T-34 Crewmen. They are pretty good resin figures, but it isn't the greatest as compared to other companies like Stalingrad or Alpine. But alas, I have to deal with what I have. I was lucky enough to get these 3 figures for only £5 at a model show, but usually I see them retailing for about 12 to 15, which is, in my opinion, quite fair considering you get 3 figures. Now, to get a start on Ivan, I need to first get him ready and impale him onto a cord, which will work as a sort of DIY handle. This is probably the best homemade handle you can make. From what I heard, is a good option if you either don't want to spend a bunch of money on a handle or holder, considering you might not use it often. Attaching him is quite simple, just drill a 0.3mm hole in the soles of his shoes and glue in there a bit of 0.4mm copper wire. Then simply take the figure and put it into the cork. Now, before I began painting, I did wash the figure with soap and let it dry in a container so that no dust would settle on it. After the figure has been dried, it is time to prime it like any other model. For this, I'm using the good old trusty Mr. Hobby 1500 Black, as I do want to pre-shade this figure, which will allow for the painting to be much easier, only having to use glazes rather than full thick coats of paint. The pre-shade is done easily with some white paint from Tamiya sprayed at an angle from the top in order to keep some shadows in the places that have the most creases and folds. To start actually painting the figure, the best place to start off is with the face. I will be following a tutorial by CW Modelling, who is a fantastic modeler here on YouTube. If you haven't seen his stuff yet, then I would highly recommend you check him out. To begin with, I apply a brown sand glaze over the face. This will make some of the darker areas a bit more visible when I will be adding the shadows in the next step. The shadows are applied with a small brush in the darkest areas. These include the eyes, neck, and around the mouth, and under the chin as well. Now, these shadows might look a bit too dark and jarring at this moment, but after you start applying the highlights, they will begin to work much better together. The first highlight layer to be used adds sunny skin tone to the base color. This is the darkest of the 3 highlight colors, but it is also the one with the most yellowish hue. This is important since other colors that are more white in their tone can make the figure look sick and pale, so the yellow is a much better color for the first highlight. Since each highlight will progressively cover less and less area, the first one will cover quite a lot. This includes the brow, cheekbones, and most importantly the nose and the chin. The more a feature protrudes, the more highlights it will receive. This means you can blend the colors in much more easily. Following this, the second highlight is then applied. This one is lightened with basic skin tone. At this point, your brush control becomes vital, since you need to cover a very small area each time. And accidentally covering too much can cause a lot of problems and make the figure look quite bad. The third highlight uses light flesh to lighten the tone even more, and the previous steps are repeated. With the first 3 highlights applied, it's time to add back some of the red tones to the face. Normally a person will have a reddish hue to their skin, and with all the highlights so far, Ivan is lacking those. So, using a very thin wash of burnt red, the red tones are recreated with a larger amount around the mouth and eyes as well as the cheeks. Following these, the final highlights using flat flesh can be applied. This will help me correct any minor errors from the burnt red wash. And with this, the face is technically done, but for some reason I don't particularly like it. The figure just looks too sickly and pale. The highlights don't work too well, and I had a very poor attempt at blending the colors. This sadly means that I will have to try again. So to begin round 2, the paint is first stripped using some thinners. Now, not to bore you with the whole process again, here is a quick recap of how the face was painted. The figure is coated in a black primer, and then white is sprayed at an angle in order to create a pre-shade for the glazes. Now, the face will be tackled slightly differently this time, with the most important change being the amount of highlights being reduced since flat flesh is a bit too strong. First, brown sand is used, thinned, but not to a consistency of a wash. Ivan's hands and face are both covered in 2 relatively thin coats. This ensures that the coverage is even. The shadows are applied in the same way as before, but with a bit more accuracy this time around. The big difference this time around is the way in which I am tackling the highlights. The way I did it before was with a single mix before moving on to a different colour. Instead, here each highlight is done with 3 different progressively lighter mixes of said colour. This means I can very slowly build up the skin tone colour, which will provide a much smoother blend. I don't know why I didn't do this earlier, but second time's the charm, I guess. Also, if you are enjoying this video so far, please do consider subscribing and liking the video. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, if you are interested in joining a scale modelling community, there is a link down below to a Discord server. Currently we are hosting a photo-inspired group build, so if you think that will be of interest to you, please do consider joining. Now to continue, the second highlight uses basic skin tone, and again I use 3 versions of this mix. The best part of this is that it allows me to go back and fix any minor mistakes that may have been made. This not only improves the colour blending, but also makes a figure just look a little bit better. The last highlight is done with light flesh, and due to the very small area that has to be covered, I decided to use a soft bristled wide brush for blending. This helps a lot, especially with small quantities of paint like here on the cheekbones. Burnt red is used again to reintroduce the red tones to the skin, making Ivan look a bit more alive. And now instead of trying to fix any mistake with the previous colours, I decided to use a wash of Prussian blue. This wash is perfect for simulating that 5 o'clock shadow or short beard growth. It also makes the figure look a little bit more worn, considering he probably doesn't have time to shave every single day. Now with the face and hands out of the way, it's time to paint the overalls that Ivan here is wearing. Now for this, I will be using the main colour of Prussian blue, even though this is a bit inaccurate, but it is the only blue colour I have. And I much rather the blue overalls rather than the basic and pretty bland black colour. Here I'll be using glazes again, because the pre-shade will be able to help me quite a lot with the highlights and shadows. The first glaze is a mix of Prussian blue and black. This works as both a base and a shadow since it is progressively lightened with Prussian blue. This will lead into the first highlight of pure Prussian blue. Same as for the face, I use 3 different shades of Prussian blue with the black so that the jump to pure Prussian blue is blended in quite well. This is helped by the use of glazes, which themselves make the blending smoother. 2 layers of this glaze is applied over the whole figure, with the next glazes afterwards being limited to more protruding areas. The amount of layers you need for glazes depends on your desired effect. I believe here I used about 5 layers of Prussian blue before switching to the second highlight layer. This being Prussian blue lightened with sky blue. The area which I use these lighter mixes on gets smaller each time with the lighter tones. This means that by the end with the lightest tones, only the top of the shoulders and arms are being covered. With the overalls out of the way, it is time to paint the leather details. The first and largest ones here are the shoes. These get a base coat of German camo black-brown. This is personally my favourite colour to use for leather details. It has a pretty dark tone, which makes it perfect if you want to create that rich brown sort of colour rather than a brighter, more reddish leather tone. After the colours become solid, following a couple of glaze layers, I lighten the mix with a little bit of buff, just to add to the tip of the shoes. I then repeat this again for the belts. Now, for the last detail I painted was the helmet. For this I wanted Ivan to look kind of like the T-34. Considering that one has a tri-coloured cupola, I will be giving Ivan a khaki helmet. Painting it was very easy. The first layer was a set of glazes using pure Russian uniform. This colour is quite green and works very well for the shadows, since khaki goes more into a tan colour. As a result, the shadows should be much richer in their hue. Following this, the ridges of the helmet are then treated with a wash of khaki highlight. Of course, again, I use a couple different tones of this in order to make the highlights more prominent. It also helps to have a little bit of differentiation between them. Now, technically this should have been all and the figure would have been complete, but Ivan still wasn't looking exactly how I wanted him to. So instead I decided to go back and fix a few mistakes. First of all, I had to tackle the shadows and the overalls. They were bugging me quite a bit, so I gave the whole figure a couple glazes of a darkened Prussian blue. This helped to reduce the highlights which stood out a little bit too much. This is followed by lighter glazes of Prussian blue with at most a very small amount of sky blue to fix the highlights. And finally, to fix up the helmet, I decided to make the shadows a bit more prominent. This meant I made a different mix, including some black into the Russian uniform and using it as a sort of pin wash. And that was basically all. Ivan was now complete. I must say, as much as I dreaded painting the figure for this T-34, I think he turned out quite good, to be honest, for a first figure. As usual, practice does make perfect, so there will definitely be more figures being painted on this channel. So if you do think that might be something you would like to see, please do consider subscribing. The next episode will be the last in this T-34 series, and that's already in the works. So it should come out not too long from now, definitely not a 3-month wait like here. But aside from that, I want to thank you all for watching, and if you got this far, an extra thank you. I really appreciate it. Till next time, happy modeling and goodbye.